And I didn't see it.
Not a lot of smiles in the audience tonight.
Yeah, and my packet via the mail. It's been a year of so many difficult issues.
I had
Hello, everyone.
them printed out.
Hello, everyone. We'd like to get started.
Office printer and I don't like each other. If I send something to print, no, it doesn't.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. We have a lot on our agenda tonight, and we do want to be respectful with everyone's time. Thank you all for coming. I will call the meeting to order. We are a little late. It's now about 7:05, and I will ask James to call the roll, please.
City and County of San Francisco Board of Supervisors Office. City and County of San Francisco Mayor's Office. City and County of San Francisco Airport Commission.
Ivar Satiro here.
San Mateo County Board of Supervisors.
We do expect Supervisor Pine to be here.
CCAG Airport Land Use Commission. Town of Atherton.
Elizabeth Lewis.
City of Belmont. City of Brisbane. City of Burlingame.
Ricardo Ortiz.
City of Daly City. City of Foster City. City of Half Moon Bay. Town of Hillsborough.
President Al Royce.
City of Menlo Park. City of Millbrae.
Ann Schneider here.
City of Pacifica. Town of Portola Valley.
Ann Wingert.
City of Redwood City. City of San Bruno. City of San Carlos.
Adam Reck.
City of San Mateo. City of South San Francisco.
Mark Adiego.
And Town of Woodside. Madam Chair, we don't have a quorum, but we should expect one. I do know that Edward McCarthy from City and County of San Francisco did confirm he would be showing up, as well as Supervisor Dave Pine, so that should push us over for action items.
Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? I would like to acknowledge that we have several members from the FAA here with us tonight. Raquel Welch, who's the Western Regional Director. Raquel, hi. Thank you for being here.
Gervin.
I said that again.
Raquel Welch.
You know, you just look so much like her, Raquel. I am so sorry. And would you like to introduce the rest of your team?
Sure, yes.
She's cool too.
Good evening, everyone. So tonight we have Jim Heilman from the Office of Environment and Energy. He's our chief scientist, and he is going to speak on the noise issues. And in addition, we have from our team, Skylar on from the community as one of our community engagement officers, and Adam Vetter from our operations support group in our Western Service Center.
Thank you. And Adam was there with us last Thursday at our technical working group, along with his colleague, Joe Brock. Okay, and we have also with us tonight Kathleen Wentworth, who is from Congresswoman Jackie Spears' office as her technical aviation legislative aide. Thank you, Kathleen, for being here. And do we have any other members from our airport guys? No, seeing none. Okay, thank you all. I will open up item number 2 for public comments for things that are not on the agenda. I have. I do believe that we do not need a quorum to have public comments, because we only need a quorum in order to take action on action items, to take a vote. So we do have a speaker card from Louis Maraviglia, who I think, did you want to speak public comments on number 2? Yes. Okay. This, or did you have another one? Because you didn't. Okay. Take the podium and please state your name and your city. You're from Hillsborough, and I think there's a microphone up at the podium. No, up at the podium.
Podium, and the microphone is right there.
Thanks, Louis. And we do limit our comments
One.
to 2 minutes.
During the closure of 28 Wright recently, I had experienced a tremendous reduction in noise. It was wonderful. I was hardly getting any backblast noise. And I want to know what and why did that happen? Because planes were still taking off. Were they not going up side by side? Because I would expect some individual blasts, but there were hardly any. So could the FAA look at that or in the round?
Can you hold the microphone or the camera?
Yeah,
Pick it up.
could the FAA look into that and the
Louis?
Noise Abatement Center to
Louis?
see what and why?
We
And
typically don't.
maybe it will lead to the fact that it's side-by-side takeoffs, which I've noticed lately. Years ago, I never noticed them on the runway 1, right and left. So that needs, I would like to see that explored. And
Thank you. If you'd like, Director Satero from the San Francisco Airport can maybe comment on that. Typically, we don't answer questions, but this seems like an easy answer.
do you want to comment?
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to. You know, I'll tell you, we had some really unseasonably high winds during the runway closure, and that caused us to go into a straight 2-8 operation. And so it cut down the amount of, it caused a lot of delay, but it also prevented us from launching on the ones. And so that's what benefited, I think, the communities, Millbrae, Burlingame, Hillsborough. I think the other thing that benefited during the closure was just the reduction in flight activity. We had asked for voluntary reductions by the airlines to help mitigate the amount of delay that was experienced because of the loss of a runway, and they reduced their scheduled flight activity by 13%. So there were just quite a few less operations happening. Those are the two biggest contributors to that.
Okay.
And, okay, the other point I want to bring up is in the 1980s, the airport instituted at nighttime a southerly takeoff to over Foster City. And that would cause us great relief. And now I understand that has been abandoned. And I asked many months ago at one of these meetings if that could be restudied to see if that could be reinstituted. And I'd like to know why it was discontinued.
Okay.
And years ago, we were told it couldn't be done, and because of the activity, planes coming in, taking off. But a citizen in Hillsborough analyzed the data, and there was enough time between departures and landings that it could be done, and it was instituted. So I'd like to see that revisited by the FAA.
Thank you. Your 2 minutes is up, and we'll take that into consideration. I'm going to call the next public speaker. Thank you, Louis, very much. That's going to be Mark Schul from Palo Alto. Yeah, we have, and I understand, excuse me, Mark, Supervisor Pine has arrived, and Carol Ford from the airport, CKEG. And so we do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. What I'd like to speak about just for a moment is, you know, NextGen is, people know by now that NextGen is built around this architecture of concentration and repetition, everything over the same path, right? And those of us who live under that increased concentration have paid a major cost. And yet what seems to be coming out is, you know, last year the Inspector General basically came out with a report that said the net present value of the benefits without this idea of passenger time saved is zero. And then the recent Inspector General's report basically said that in the Northern California Metroplex, basically the benefits are way below by about $15 million below even the worst estimates. So we're not really getting the benefits, but we're paying the cost. And yet the next plan is to increase concentration over the same people through an RNP to GBAS, GLS landing approach. And then the other, and maybe Nick Heilman can speak to it, is this issue of, you know, ultrafine concentration, the plumes under these increasing concentrated paths. Not only do we have noise issues that we have to worry about, but also health issues, which aren't being measured at all, neither noise nor the health, over the major arrivals at San Francisco because, A, we're not in the roundtable. So these are things I think that need to be addressed, and I would ask you, who represent the airport, to please work directly with Palo Alto where these routes are and where the GBAS, RNP to GLS tracks are, to basically make sure that we're getting some benefit from it and that it's not just more cost and no real return. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Our next public speaker is Ken Miles from Pacifica, and then Darlene Yapley from Palo Alto.
Good evening. I'm from Valleymar, a small valley in the center of Pacifica. Been there 45 years, and my life's been miserable since NextGen been implemented by FAA. I frequently wake up at night at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning listening to planes flying overhead. Well, it used to be a very quiet valley, and I'm sure the wildlife appreciates it as well. I don't know when this is going to stop. It's just going to keep on increasing. More and more passengers are coming to Silicon Valley, flying in and out and being advertised by Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to see more noise monitors, ground-based, planted in Pacifica. We only have one at the far end north, and we've been promised that there'd be some noise monitors there, but it hadn't happened. I'd also like to see a study come up and show how much carbon fuel per passenger mile versus train or automobile. I think the planes are the more consuming of fossil fuels than the trains or automobiles, and that should be investigated and reported, as well as the last speaker talking about the amount of pollution. There's a hell of a lot of pollution coming down. When I park out by Muscle Rock, the planes going off to Europe and Asia, it leaves a film over my car after about 1 hour. I get in there and see the window. I haven't been here in a while, and I guess it doesn't really matter because I don't think anything's going to come out of this committee at all. It's just a money waster. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. Darlene? And then Liz Lopez from San Francisco. Darlene?
The Department of Transportation Inspector General issued a report on the FAA's NextGen implementation dated August 27, 2019. The Metroplex sites have achieved significantly lower benefits than expected. The estimated 7 Metroplexes nationwide benefits are half of previous estimates annually, from 31 million, targeted originally for 61 million. Benefits were items such as more direct paths and fuel savings. There's no consensus between the FAA and industry about actual benefits achieved. But most importantly, and I'm going to route this to all of you there, most importantly, the NorCal Metroplex is the only Metroplex with negative benefits. The only Metroplex with negative benefits, $7 million annually. This means negative benefits without even including the negative airplane noise and emissions that we're all here speaking about. Can you imagine neither our community nor industry is having positive benefits from NorCal NextGen? Someone needs to take a serious look at what the FAA is doing in NorCal Metroplex and why did this go south. Clearly, this is not what Congress had in mind to modernize the airspace. Please consider requesting a detailed audit or hearing of the NextGen implementation at the NorCal Metroplex. The Roundtable should contact congressional offices, both the House and the Senate, and I'd like to see the Legislative Committee restarted and lead this effort along with advocacy for Senator Warren's bill and Representative Lynch bills on the health impact of airplane noise. And I will route the report. There's a link on the second page, and the beautiful graph will show you the negative of our area. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene, for that information. Liz Lopez, and then Charlie Wambek. Vicky. Hi, Liz.
So my comment also had to do with the Inspector General report. So the title of it was the FAA had made progress in implementing its Metroplex program, but benefits for airspace users have fallen short of expectation. My comment on that is I was pretty disheartened because in the report, it seems like the FAA blamed the community, including like the Roundtable, who's trying to help their community. They blamed us for this shortcoming, this like $7.7 million shortcoming that they had for the fuel consumption. And this is concerning because it seems that the FAA was basing their savings model on the abuse and exploitation of the American public living under these superhighways. So that's my comment, it's my concern.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Charlie?
I'm Charlie Wambeck from San Francisco. Been living in my house for 52 years, and I curse the FAA every single day of my life now since 2015 and Next Gen. One thing that bothers me is I couldn't make it last meeting because of health issues, but you know, you didn't have a quorum then, and you went through all the speakers here. It just goes to show what you think of the community speakers without a quorum. And then you say that you can't discuss anything, but yet you open it up for discussion tonight. So I think one of the things that we need to do, I wish we had a Greta Thunberg in our midst that would fight for shutting down the airlines, man. You know, we have to start doing less air travel than more air travel. And anybody has anything to do with the airport? I worked at the airport in the 60s and the 70s. And there has never been a single day since I started working at the airport in the mid-60s that there hasn't been construction at the airport, okay? You know, you guys have been doing construction for the last 40 years. And I think it's about time that instead of worrying about the noise and these paths, because I have a path just like a lot of you do here, I have a path that goes right over my house. I am in the eye of the needle, just like so many other people here are. We're in the eye of the needle with these next-gen flights coming over us all the time. You can't go out in your backyard without having these airlines just polluting, just spewing crap down on us, and noise, and just making our lives miserable. It's horrible. We have to start thinking about how to roll back air traffic instead of doing something about the noise.
Thank you. Okay, if there's, that's all of our public speaker comment cards I have, so we will move on to the consent agenda, which is, there's only one item on the consent agenda, which is the airport director's reports for July and August 2019, and the second quarter 2019 Fly Quiet report. This is an action item. Do I have any member of the roundtable who has any comments or questions on these reports? Do I have any member of the public who has, I have no public comment cards on this action. I'm going to bring it back to the roundtable, and I'd like to call for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
And second from Milbray. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So the consent agenda is passed. We'll go on to our regular agenda, which is general airport information, and I'll turn it over to Ivar Satero, our airport director, San Francisco Airport.
Sure. Thanks, Elizabeth. Runway construction, it completed ahead of schedule, about a week ahead of schedule. As you all heard, it changed the dynamics of the airport and noise, and some people got reprieve during that 2-week period. Caused a lot of delays. We had worked with the airlines well in advance on flight reductions, schedule reductions, and that's how we achieved with the FAA's leadership about a 13% schedule reduction. That was about double what we've ever achieved before in these types of runway projects. During that time, we also discontinued the preferential runway use program, started it an hour later to help that delay that builds up over the day. And that's what we saw, was this accumulation of delay from early morning and then flights pushing all the way past, more flights pushing past midnight. And so by doing this, we were able to mitigate that kind of buildup of delay that happened during the course of the day. But that now is since we're in full operation, those are back in the normal preferential use runway hours are back in service. And we are hopeful, well, we anticipate no more runway closures over the next couple of years of that magnitude. So this was fixing a part that was continuing to fail and a lot of emergency repairs that create a lot of uncertainty with related to the ability to operate in a reliable way on that runway. GBAS, people, I think most of you know what GBAS is, but just quickly, it's GPS-based navigation, and the airport is investing $10 million into this technology to allow us to customize flight patterns. Hopefully there's a community benefit. We've done some initial testing and we'll be doing more testing around GBAS. But a quick update on the implementation. It has two benefits. One is you can customize these arrivals into the airport, which allows you to potentially use more offshore into the bay approaches and potentially even higher altitudes at approach. And it also, that issue of accumulation of delay during the day and this buildup in aircraft that get delayed past midnight and into the early morning hours, it helps mitigate that delay as well. So I think there's a good benefit, and I've heard from the community quite a bit of support. We are working with Honeywell as the provider on this, and there are release of liability. We're in contract negotiations with Honeywell now, and there's a lot of other jurisdictions that are doing this as well. Seattle is doing a GBAS implementation. I think there's 3 or 4 other airports, Portland, I believe. And we're all kind of stuck in this negotiations with Honeywell on the liability language. So we're trying to get through it. We're working together to try to come up with language that allow us to move forward with the procurement of the technology and the installation of the system. But we're hung up and it's causing some delay, but we're trying over the next couple months to get through that impasse. Second chance and replacement noise insulation program. Wanted to give some numbers on that. As everyone may recall, there's essentially 2 programs. There's the Windows replacement program. That is the initiative that the airport started and is funding with airport funds every year for those folks that aren't eligible for FAA funds, but they were eligible back when they got the original installation done and window replacement. So the airport has a $1.5 million budget a year committed to those houses within the 65 CNEL. We have a total of 770 applications for those. We find about 511 are within the 65 CNEL, and we've visited 323 where we go out there with our consultant and take measurements and preparing to move forward with those houses over time to replace the windows and that kind of thing. The second chance program is the FAA's program. We had a total of 522 applications, 155 fall within the CNEL, and we visited about 122. So both programs are very active. We recently got a grant of $6.7 million from the FAA. We'll be adding, I think, another $2 to $3 million, so we can do about 70 homes over the next year and keep moving year to 2 years, and then we'll just keep moving along that program. Passenger traffic, quick update. We are down about 3%. We've been flat and down a little bit year over year. International continues to be strong, about 7% up, but it's offset by domestic traffic, about 3% down. So we're about flat year over year in our total traffic enplanements. Airlines, we do have a couple airlines. I usually talk about airlines that are adding service to SFO. We have 3 airlines that are discontinuing service. XL Airways to Paris, Thomas Cook, which you may have all seen a lot of press about, and then Iceland Air. Those are 3 discontinued flights out of SFO. And then Night Hush. Night Hush is this initiative to try to make greater use of over-the-bay flights. at nighttime hours. And so we are continuing to evaluate the feasibility of this. And again, we are committed to not advocating for anything that doesn't have a net benefit and doesn't shift noise. And so the principles are still, those are the principles we hold to on this. And the next step is to further engage with the airlines and the FAA and we have meetings coming up to further discuss night hush and whether we can proceed into the design and study of the night hush departures. And then for noise monitoring update, we're replacing our permanent noise monitoring system. We've replaced 9 of the 29 permanent sites. 9 are now completed. Software will be completed in mid-October. And I think we've finalized a couple new installations recently with community input that potentially we're going to be relocated. But I think we have community agreement on the location. So that's my report.
Thank you, Ivar.
Thanks.
Does anyone from the membership have questions? Mike and then Ann.
Excuse me, the last meeting we were talking about the noise monitors, and we were getting new ones. And we were going to be talking about a procedure if the city wants to get additional monitors. Is that going to be on the agenda at some point?
So if I could, can I take that? Actually, Mike, it is on the agenda, and it is item number 8 on this agenda tonight, discussion of Roundtable's role regarding SFO noise monitors. So I'll be giving an update with the consultant on that. Okay, thank you. Yes, Ann.
Just for the record then, as we get bigger planes create bigger backblast. Is that correct? So as we go from more international flights over domestic flights, is that going to increase the ground-based noise? And are we testing for that?
I can't really answer that specifically. The bigger planes typically take off on the 2.8s. The internationals take off on the 2.8s, and the 2.8s aren't the backblast noise source. It's the ones.
Except, I mean, I've been working with your noise office. It seems like since the skin went on the airport, on the new hotel, I'm getting backblast noise. So basically this area coming from the north, which is something new.
I can't really comment on that. Yeah, I'm not sure how that.
It's not, it was actually lovely while 28 Left was closed. It was a little quieter. But the big planes are brutal to us here in Millbrae. I can't speak for Burlingame and Hillsborough, but pretty brutal.
Thank you. Mark.
Director Satterwhite, you mentioned the 70 homes that there might be enough budget for on the second chance? Is it the second chance?
Yeah.
And you're evaluating those with site visits?
Yes, yes.
When do you determine the winners, and what's the time frame?
The prioritization, I think it's first come, do we do it first come, first serve on that, Bert? So whoever filed first, I think we've been doing it in that kind of order. Can we provide a list of the house? I'm not sure.
Probably not.
Yeah.
No. It's probably, and if they meet the criteria. And
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I thought you had pretty big numbers of the amount of people, residents you've gone out and inspected. I mean, it seems, but unfortunately, in the second round, only out of 500 applicants, 150 or something were within the contour.
The 65, yeah.
65 CNA. Okay. So, anything else? Any other? Terry, yes.
I know we probably can't answer this directly, but September 26th, Brisbane in particular was being bombarded by flights that were coming over. And when I did flight tracking on those, almost all their scheduled route was night hush. But they were flying over Brisbane and heading east. Came over the mountain and head east. When they have a published route that says they're supposed to be doing night hush, why would that be deviating?
That's an FAA question, yeah. I'm just not sure. That's an FAA question.
I think that was part of the big wind on the 26th. Did you have big winds?
Oh, yeah, probably, yeah. What you might have seen is with the big winds and all takeoffs on the 28th, they make a hard right turn off the end of the runway. Is that what you're saying when they're headed east? Yeah, the winds were probably requiring that.
She wasn't. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome. So I do have 2 speaker cards from the public for this item. We'll say Liz Lopez and then Charlie Wambach.
So Director Sotero mentioned the preferential runway use program. I just wanted to make sure it was clear that this incorporates the 1L runway. And so this sends the majority of departures over the working class communities of San Francisco. So I just wanted to make sure this was understood that it's not really preferential to San Francisco, even though it's called a preferential runway use program. And these flights are actually all outside of the 65 CNEL. So no matter how many flights come over our homes, no matter how loud they are, even though they're at 25,000 feet, or sorry, 2,500 feet or 3,000 feet, it's never, no portion of this grant money will ever go to any San Francisco resident. So I just want to make that clear. And then next, regarding the night hush, so it's great that there's going to be more meetings, but I'm wondering why they've been held in secret and no one from the public. I don't know even if anybody from the Roundtable has been invited just to even listen, participate, or why there's no transcripts. It just seems a little odd that this is all happening in secret.
Thank you. Charlie?
Charlie Wambach from San Francisco. One of the things that bothered me about your report, Mr. Sotero, is that, you know, this business about shifting noise, okay, and that's an issue with the Roundtable in general. You don't want to shift noise. Well, guess what? You've already shifted the noise, okay? You know, I lived in my house for 48 years, never hardly ever heard a jet come over my house, except for about 30 years ago when they did for about 2 weeks, and I quickly stopped after that. So you've shifted the noise, all right? And if I lived in the East Bay, I'd be happy to come to these meetings because you shifted the noise. Going over to the east, you know, now I have flights that are flying to Miami that come over San Francisco. You have flights that are flying to North Carolina that come over San Francisco. Flights that are going over to Newark that come over San Francisco. And you know, as far as, anyway, the shifting of noise, that's you ought to rethink that, okay? Because you've already shifted the noise. Okay, so if you want to mitigate the noise over the flight paths that come over our house, it's going to have to go someplace. As far as I'm concerned, it can go back from where it came from.
Okay, thank you. All right. Moving on to item number 5, I'm going to let Director Sartero tee this up and with an introduction to Raquel Gervin.
You know, as I've mentioned previously, I sit on the FAA convened a noise forum of the directors from the large airports in the Western region to try to deal with all of the impacts of what's going on and the right way to engage with the community. And that's, you see the presence today of the FAA, and really pleased. I've seen a lot of movement over the year that I've been involved with the FAA Noise Forum, and I think the presence today of the folks here from the FAA show that their desire to try to work through solutions. At the last Noise Forum, I was just, the FAA folks did a presentation on what they're working on from a scientific perspective with some educational institutions. And I just thought it was worthwhile for you all to see some of the things that they've been looking at and for the future of aviation and addressing community issues around our industry. So thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. And thanks, Raquel, for getting the folks here. Please, if you would, introduce the team. The presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to just kind of give a little pre-meeting and some expectations. I understand that Jim has a presentation of about 25, 30 minutes.
Yeah, 20.
Yes, and then we have an opportunity to ask him questions afterwards, members of the roundtable and the public. So I am very excited that he is here. He's come all the way from Washington, D.C. today to be with us.
All right, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. My name's Jim Heilman. I'm the Chief Scientific and Technical Advisor for Environment and Energy for the Federal Aviation Administration. What that means is I have the responsibility for the research, engineering, and development budget of the FAA to deal with issues of noise and emissions. What I'm going to go through in my briefing here is just some highlights of efforts that we have to understand and address aviation noise and emissions challenges. So I'll be hitting a lot of things at a fairly high level. Just by way of introduction, the FAA as an organization has roughly, it's a $17 billion organization, roughly 40,000 employees. The vast majority of the people and effort is in terms of the air traffic, moving airplanes, as well as aviation safety, all the people who handle the safety of flight operations. Where I reside and where Don Scotta resides, whom you heard earlier, Ivar, is within the Office of Environment and Energy, and we're under the Policy, International Affairs, and Environment Office. And so our office has responsibility for some of the aviation noise tools I'll talk about, technology, science, and a number of other things dealing with aviation noise and emissions and policy. And just to highlight at the outset, I present a lot of these same slides everywhere I go to a lot of different audiences. So obviously there are environmental impacts of aviation. I've heard a number of people commenting on those this morning. There are also economic benefits of aviation. It's an economic driver. The reason we have so many aircraft flying is it's a central part of the economy. And it's also very important to things such as our GDP and our balance of trade. It's actually the largest export sector in the U.S. economy. But that's not to say that it doesn't have impact. So within our Office of Environment and Energy, we have a mission and vision. The mission is to understand, manage, and reduce the environmental impacts of global aviation through research, technological innovation, policy, and outreach to benefit the public. These are the handles that we have within our office: research, innovation, policy. We don't design flight tracks. We don't place the aircraft in the skies. We're not the ones who build aircraft, but we're trying to advance knowledge. And our vision with that knowledge is to remove environmental constraints on aviation growth by achieving quiet, clean, and efficient air transport. So the overall strategy that we have, and there's a lot going on in this slide, but the overall strategy is we have goals for noise, air quality, and energy. We have various plans that are outlined in the upper right-hand corner. And what we're doing with the research and development portfolio that I oversee is first is to advance our science and integrated modeling capabilities. So that's understanding the noise at the source, how it propagates, understand emissions, how they react in the atmosphere, understand what's going on with those, and then capture them within our environmental modeling tools. This knowledge then can be used, some of it by us, but more importantly by industry and other parts of the agency to affect change, whether it's through quieter, cleaner aircraft, new operational procedures, sustainable aviation fuels, or better understanding of new entrants, such as unmanned systems or other vehicles. We do a fair amount of analysis to inform the decision-making by the agency. And a lot of the analysis that we do to inform decision-making has to do with new noise and emission standards, but we also provide the tools that are used for assessing noise and emissions. And then as a whole, we are influential in setting aircraft and engine standards. We actually have responsibility for that. The carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, an international plan to address CO2 emissions from international aviation. And we're also very heavily engaged with the community engagement efforts of the agency. So the research programs that we have to to execute this program, first is the CLEAN program, the Continuous Lower Energy Emissions and Noise program. This is a public-private partnership that I'll talk about in more detail in a later slide. But through it, we have a one-to-one cost share agreement with industry to develop technologies that would reduce noise emissions and fuel burn from the fleet. Our second major endeavor is our Ascent Center of Excellence. This is a center of excellence for alternative jet fuel and environment. The FAA as a whole has 6 separate centers. This one is centered out of Washington State and MIT. Stanford's a member. It involves really great research institutions, and as I go through my deck, I'll talk a bit about what the Ascent folks are doing. We also are a co-founder and primary sponsor of the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative, or CAFI, which is spearheading the efforts to get sustainable aviation fuels produced. And we do a lot of work with the Volpe Center as well as a number of contractors. So I'm going to talk about noise, and then I'm going to talk about emissions. So in talking about noise, it's important to recall that there are 2 different metrics. There's 2 different aspects of noise, wherein we FAA have the ability to regulate. One is at the aircraft itself. So all aircraft that come off the assembly line have to meet a noise standard. And so that's a function of the individual operation and is measured 2 points on takeoff, 1 on arrival, and we've been using this since the 1960s or 70s, I forget when, to regulate noise from aircraft operations. The other metric that you're probably more familiar with is the day-night noise level, or DNL, which is a cumulative metric, which then accounts for all the operations by the aircraft. So we think in terms of both these, the individual aircraft as well as the cumulative impact. And so if you look at the individual aircraft themselves, the noise levels per individual aircraft operation have come down dramatically since the 1960s with the first regulations that we had on commercial aircraft. The original 737-200 is dramatically louder than the modern 737 MAX or the A320s. There's a considerable delta there in terms of the noise emissions. So the individual operations have gotten less, and as a consequence, the requirements that aircraft have to meet when they come off the assembly line have also been coming down. And this is a function of the fact that aircraft today are much more efficient than they were a number of years ago. This has to come about with the change from turbojets to turbofans, which was driven by fuel efficiency, but has the nice side benefit of reduced noise, as well as a tremendous improvement in aircraft design from the older 747s to the modern 747-8. There's just a lot fewer places where you would have turbulence to generate noise. And so what this has led to over time, this is a chart from 1975 to 2020, it shows the number of people exposed to that day-night noise level of 65, as well as passenger employments. And what it shows is from 1970s to now, we went from roughly 7 million people exposed to DNL 65 to roughly 430,000 now. And that's come about with a large increase in employments. Now, the noise experience, though, has changed dramatically over that period of time. And if I were working in most any other industry or any other thing, and I said that we had a 90-some% reduction in whatever a measure of badness was, you would probably think, why do you get any money to do any work? Well, it's obvious that this has been good, but it's not sufficient. More obviously needs to be done. And if you look at other metrics, whether it's DNL 60 or 55, I don't have the data here, but I've seen charts for that. We've also had similar reductions over time. So today's situation is such that we have a different type of aircraft flying. So the aircraft of today are dramatically different than those in the past. I just showed you that. And so an aircraft from the 1970s produces about the same acoustic energy as 10 to 30 aircraft operations today. So you could have 10 to 30 aircraft from today flying, and that would make the same acoustic energy as one aircraft operating back in the 70s. So you can imagine that the experience, and I know I don't have to say this, but the experience would be very different. And one way to do that mathematically is you could have one event per day with an SEL of 114 dBA, something like a car horn, and that could meet 65 DNL. Or you could have 100 events at an SEL of 94 dB, something comparable to a lawnmower. It's the same acoustic energy, but the experience is obviously very different. So we have this experience going on with the, I showed you before with the large number increase in enplanements. We have the decrease in the amount of noise. And then as well, you have precision navigation, which is being implemented to increase the safety and efficiency of the NAS. So while I show that the number of people exposed has gone down dramatically over time, obviously the experience today is very different than it was in the past. So that outlines where we are, and I know that what I'm saying, a lot of you already know this better than I ever will. So our efforts right now on noise are multiple. And so this is the summary slide of what we have going on noise from the perspective of my office, where I work. So we have a fair amount of effort ongoing to understand noise. A lot of this is about improving our modeling capabilities. I know that everybody would like to have a noise monitor everywhere, but that's prohibitively expensive. You just can't place them everywhere. They're very expensive. So we're developing the best modeling system we can to model that noise as accurately as possible. And I'll talk a bit more about that. We have research to look at the relationship between aircraft noise and annoyance, sleep, cardiovascular health, and children's learning. I have a slide on that. And we're not only thinking about today's aircraft, but we're also working to think about helicopters. Actually, I have a research project with Penn State to develop operational procedures to reduce noise. A lot of effort on commercial supersonic aircraft, drones, as well as commercial space, and not listed there, but also standing up efforts in urban air mobility. One of the areas where I personally think that the FAA as a whole has made good progress in the last few years is in terms of outreach and enhanced community involvement, and to try to convey information better. I'm not going to say that it's perfect, but I think it's improved, in my humble opinion. We have, as I'll talk about in a bit, efforts ongoing to reduce the noise at the source through aircraft technologies. I already showed you the chart with noise standards. In terms of mitigation, we're thinking through about vehicle operations. I have a chart on that. And then we have the sound insulation program. So in terms of our modeling capabilities, our primary tool, our workhorse, is the Aviation Environmental Design Tool, or AEDT. This is a tool that replaced a number of tools a few years ago. And it computes noise, fuel burn, and emissions simultaneously. So you have one tool, you put in the procedures, you run it, it spits out everything at once. We use it to analyze individual airports, regions, the nation, the globe. This is the tool that we use to inform our decision-making at the International Civil Aviation Organization when we're doing standard setting. This is the default tool that's used by the world to understand the cost-effectiveness of different regulations for noise and emissions. It's also required for all regulatory actions within the United States. It's also in use by 428 international users from 36 countries. Its predecessor, the integrated noise model, is actually written into some regulations in Europe. So this is the state-of-the-art in noise and emissions modeling in planet Earth. Not to say that it can't be improved. Obviously it can. So our latest version of the tool, ADT3B, was just released last week. We're very excited about that. It improved dramatically over the previous version with improvements in aircraft performance modeling, better takeoff weight and thrust modeling, and improved capabilities at lower noise levels. The original integrated noise model was designed to be very accurate at DNL 65. We understand we have to model very well at lower DNL levels. So we're putting a lot of effort in place. A lot of our resources are going to improve this tool such that we can model the noise more accurately at DNL 55, because we know we need to be able to get that right. We have a number of projects ongoing with our university partners to look at noise impacts. We have a fairly robust research program to understand the potential impacts of aviation noise on public health and welfare. In terms of annoyance, in 2014, we initiated a national survey to measure public annoyance to aircraft noise as part of our overall efforts. We got responses from over 10,000 people living near 20 U.S. airports, and the results and a draft report are currently under review. Sleep disturbance, we've had a project ongoing with the medical school at the University of Pennsylvania. That project has done 2 pilot studies at 2 different airports, and we're currently in the process of setting up a national study to look at what, if any, impact aviation noise has on sleep, and most importantly, to quantify it. In terms of cardiovascular health, we're working with the Boston University School of Public Health, as well as MIT, to look at historic model noise levels with existing epidemiological studies to determine what, if any, correlation exists between cardiovascular disease and aviation noise. And the folks doing these studies are the ones who've done the peer-reviewed work on this subject in the past, and they're very well respected in the field. And if you want to know more about the projects, they're listed at the bottom. In terms of technology, I mentioned at the outset the CLEAN program, or Continuous Lower Energy Emissions and Noise program. This is an FAA-led public-private partnership wherein the FAA puts in $1 and industry is required to put in at least $1. They've actually been matching it 2 to 1 thus far. And this is a program that is meant to lead to reduced fuel burn emissions and noise via aircraft and engine technologies, and we have used it to do work on alternative jet fuels. And the intent is that industry takes technologies that haven't quite gotten over the valley of death and then goes through and does testing and actual demonstrations at realistic scale such that they're ready for introduction. This is a program that was actually started in the last years of the Bush administration, and then continued under the Obama administration, is continuing again in the current administration, and is included within the president's budget going forward. The first 2 phases of the program had a lot of work on emissions reductions, has led to a lot of really good work in terms of reducing NOx and particulate matter. The 3rd phase of CLEAN, which we're in the process of standing up right now, is actually going to have a much greater emphasis on noise. And we're placing that as a point of emphasis for the program. And honestly, on all these slides, I could probably go into a very long, detailed brief, but we don't have time. In terms of aircraft operations, it's important to note a few things. There are opportunities for noise reductions, but there are limitations. It's actually the airlines that determine what aircraft that fly and when they operate. There could be opportunities, though, to change where aircraft fly and how the aircraft are flown. And you have to consider the entirety of the airspace and ensure the continued safety of the operations before any procedure. So what we've been doing is working very closely with MIT through a memorandum of understanding with Massport to understand what is in the realm of the possible in terms of operational procedures. And the folks at MIT have put, looking pretty broadly at different things and using Boston Logan as a test ground for what could be done. And they've been thinking pretty widely about this, thinking about route changes, thinking about how thrust and speed could be managed, thinking about the vertical profile, could you come in steeper, as well as thinking about systematic dispersion and what kind of metrics would you use to communicate that, and how would you work with the communities to actually do a systematic dispersion. And this work, some of you have probably heard about a study looking at reducing takeoff speed that could potentially provide noise benefit, and this led to a provision and reauthorization, Section 179. Was this work that identified it, but then one of the things that's important to know about research is we don't know what we're doing in advance. If we did, we wouldn't spend taxpayers' dollars on it. It'd be a waste. And what we found with that work is actually that reducing speed on takeoff more than likely won't provide any benefit. This is subsequent analysis that we did with NASA, as well as Boeing, using some of their test data and going back and thinking about it more deeply. But we're continuing to look. There could be opportunities for speed reduction and thrust management on approach that could provide benefit in the area between the DNL roughly 55, a little bit further out. And we're doing a lot of thinking about that last point on systematic dispersion. So I'm going to shift gears. So that was your very quick run through on noise. I'm going to give you a comparable run through on emissions. So I should feel guilty about showing chemical engineering charts at a night meeting. You seem like nice people. But what this chart is getting at is there's two things that determine what comes out of the engine. One is the fuel that goes in the tank, and the other one is the technology that's actually in the engine. And then the thing that matters is what you and I breathe in. It's not necessarily what comes out of the tailpipe. So it's important to consider how those pollutants transform in the atmosphere, are dispersed, and then what just comes out through rain or is blown away. And the criteria pollutants that are of most interest for aircraft operations are particulate matter and ozone. And it's really the particulate matter that's of most interest. And that's because a number of epidemiological studies have linked long-term exposure of fine particulate matter to increased risk of premature mortality. And there's a number of the studies there that are the foundations for the regulations in place by the EPA. And there's three different sizes that PM is regulated on. The first is PM10, which has a diameter less than or equal to 10 microns. And just to give you a sense of size, this is human hair. This is nice beach sand, very fine. Little blue dot is PM10. The second one here is PM2.5, less than 2.5 microns. Those are little red dots on top of the blue one. And then ultrafine particulate matter, PM.1, which has a diameter less than 0.1 microns. So the EPA regulates at both the 10 and 2.5, and the state of California has regulations on 0.1. And so the aircraft engines do produce particulate matter. This is also called soot or non-volatile particulate matter or black carbon. It's all the same stuff. That's all the same stuff. But the engines also produce different volatile organic compounds that can then condense and react in the atmosphere to form other things like ammonia nitrate and ammonia sulfate. And so that those are the contributions of aircraft engines to PM. And then the aircraft engines operate at very high pressures and temperatures. They're incredibly efficient engines, some of the most thermodynamically efficient engines on planet Earth. And as such, the PM is actually rather small, and so all the PM produced by aircraft engines falls in this class. And we in FAA and the Office of Environment and Energy have actually been doing work to understand and quantify the impacts of aircraft emissions for a number of years now. This is work that goes back to probably about 2005, really, 2004, 2005. And so some of the work that's come out of the FAA's funded activity, so researchers at the University of North Carolina did an examination with Boston University of the top 66 airports in the U.S. And they found that aircraft operations contribute less than 1% of all ambient PM 2.5 in those regions. And those are the largest metro airport areas in the US, including San Francisco. Now, mind you, that's based on mass, not number. And then the second point, this is work that was done out of MIT, and it's the same group that went through and quantified the health impacts of the what Volkswagen cheating did in terms of the diesel emissions. So it's the same group, well-known, well-respected group. And they found that aircraft activities contribute to 0.3% of the health impacts of combustion emissions in the US. And they did this by looking at all sources of combustion emissions across the US and then looking at their impacts. More recently, this is work that was not funded by the FAA. Based on some measurements in the Seattle area, University of Washington researchers went around and found that road traffic produces more PM relative to aviation at all sizes down to 20 nanometers, whereas aircraft produce more PM relative to emissions at sizes from 10 to 20 nanometers. So this is not to say that aircraft emissions and particulate matter should not be reduced. Quite the contrary, they should. It's just trying to place this in perspective to other sources. And we have a fair amount of efforts ongoing about jet fuel and emissions. I know that a couple of people in the audience talked about carbon dioxide and climate. And we actually are doing a lot of work on alternative fuels. This is my one slide where I get to talk about that. So we measure emissions from engines. You saw that. We do a lot of atmospheric impact modeling. We do this for both conventional fuels as well as biofuels, or more commonly known as sustainable aviation fuels. We're the office that supports the certification and qualification testing to ensure these fuels are safe for use. The fuel that United is using in LAX, our office provided the testing to support that, and we're instrumental in getting that fuel approved. We do a lot of analysis to understand the environmental and economic sustainability of these fuels, and it's my office that's been going through and figuring out how to credit those fuels within the International Civil Aviation Organization's CORSIA, or Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation. We also have engine standards. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. We've been thinking pretty deeply about how fuel composition could be modified to reduce emissions. It doesn't seem to be cost beneficial, though, based on the research we've gotten thus far. Aircraft technologies, vehicle operations, and then again, working on public-private partnerships, and then through a number of different ways through our Commercial Aviation Fuel Initiative. So coming back to technology and emissions reduction. So I showed the top chart earlier with the DC-8 taking off in 1958 and the Boeing 787 taking off more recently. And I obviously was not alive in 1958. I cannot imagine that every aircraft operation taking off looked that way, but I know that some did. And that just goes to show that the tremendous progress that the engine makers have made in reducing the emissions that come out of the tailpipe. Even since 1995, we've had a 50% reduction in the NOx emission standard. And then this past February, we actually got an agreement on a particulate matter standard for aircraft engines. This is a standard that will limit the mass and number of PM that are allowed to be produced by aircraft engines. And so we're putting a regulation in place to limit both of those. Through the CLEAN program that I mentioned, we worked hand in hand with GE on their TAPS 2 combustor, which got a step change in particulate matter, as well as a 55% reduction in the landing takeoff, or I should say it's 55% below the most recent CAPE standard. And it was a large reduction relative to the current state of the art. And we're currently doing more work with a number of engine companies. So I've covered a lot of ground there, and I think I probably went more toward the 30 minutes than the 20 minutes on that. My apologies. This is my last slide. I hope you got the sense that we are doing quite a bit. We have a comprehensive approach to address environmental challenges. We're working with a broad range of stakeholders to understand issues and develop potential solutions. We've been thinking more about innovation of late to overcome noise and emissions challenges. We continue to seek partnerships, both within the U.S. as well as internationally. And I didn't cover it here, but we're actually being very responsive to priorities outlined in the FAA Reauthorization Act. I heard somebody mention the noise health study earlier. That's actually Section 189 of reauthorization. The BU-MIT work I mentioned on health actually responds directly to that and meets the request in that section. And so I believe that is it, yes. So thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you're going to be available for some questions, I'd like to open it up to our roundtable members if they have any comments or questions for Jim at this point. I see Ann, and then Ann and Ann.
Yeah, I do.
And then anyone else? Ann?
I'm finding my notes here.
Okay.
When you talk about the noise reductions or noise measurements, are you including low-frequency noise and high-frequency noise bundled together?
Yeah, so both of the metrics that we use are A-weighted metrics. So they take account of all frequencies between 20 and 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz. But because it's A weighting, there's less emphasis placed on the lower and the higher frequencies, but they are measured.
So for those of us and other airports or other roundtables that may be working on ground-based or low-frequency noise, is there a possibility of getting those separated out so that we know what we're really talking about?
There was actually a study that was conducted under our Partner Center of Excellence a number of years ago at Minneapolis-St. Paul, where they actually went through and looked at the low-frequency noise.
Was that the 2002 or the 19?
It was more like 2005 or 6. It's been a few years ago. But the work there did not, I mean, they went through and quantified it, but it didn't really lead to anything unique or different that should be done.
So I've been on the roundtable almost 4 years, and from the beginning, the noise that most affects my constituents close into the airport is the low-frequency departure noise. We get everything else. We get every type of noise the airport can produce, but it's that low-frequency noise, and I've always been told you cannot mitigate it. Is the work that you're doing with the airline manufacturers, are they working on reduction techniques for low-frequency noise and vibration?
The work that we're doing with them is primarily geared, well, it's the metric of success is certification noise, which is measured in EP&dB, effective perceived noise. And what that accounts for both low frequency, high frequency, and in between. But that's the measure of goodness right now with our program, because that's how we certify the aircraft.
So you can see my problem is when you lump everything together, it could be easier to fix the things at the higher frequency, and the lower frequency continues to be ignored, unless I can see data that shows otherwise. If you're bundling high, mid, and low frequency to get a certification, and it is easier to fix the problems at a higher frequency or in-flight noise in terms of overall certification, then you can ignore that form of pollution that is more difficult to deal with.
Yeah, maybe, but I'd honestly, I mean, I appreciate knowing more what you're actually hearing, because it's going to depend. I mean, if it's a jet noise rumble, that's being dealt with. The fan noise is not really that kind. It's not a low rumble.
I would be happy to invite you over to my house. It's a block from here. We can sit on the kitchen porch all day and night. You can hear it.
All right. So Ann Wengert.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit back to the last slide you had on the noise part of your presentation, Jim. And I was immediately struck by the last bullet, which was the introduction of systemic dispersion, which would fly in the face of all that NextGen has been working on. So I wanted you to, if you could, provide a little more color and fill in on that one in terms of what that means exactly. Is it reversing some of the impacts we've obviously been feeling from the NextGen concentration?
I wouldn't say that it's reversing the impacts. I wouldn't say it's reversing NextGen either. What it is the folks at MIT have been going through and looking at what are different ways that you could get dispersion within the, while still having performance-based navigation. And there are various ways that you could potentially do this. And, you know, for example, you could just move a waypoint. You can move a waypoint further in, and then what that's going to do is it'll lead to, you know, dispersion happening once they're allowed to fly wherever they want. That's just one way of doing it. Other ways you can, you know, do to fly to altitude and then allow them to go whatever way they want. That would also introduce a dispersion. And so they've gone through and, you know, and identified a number of these. MITRE's also been looking at this. They've identified means. The FAA as a whole, we've already, I shouldn't say we, the Air Traffic Organization has been thinking about this as well. But the challenge that we've been coming up with on that is how do we then effectively communicate that such that people like this can have an informed discussion about what that means? Because these types of changes, you know, will not be, you know, well captured with a DNL type of analysis. So John Hans, it's MIT and their research actually were looking at a different metric to try to quantify this for the purposes of communication. And so from my perspective of what I've seen from the MIT researches, I think it actually will probably be easier to come up with something that could disperse than it will be to figure out how to use it. That's my opinion as somebody who's closer to the academic side than being in the real world that you live in.
Adam from San Carlos.
Thank you, Jim, for that presentation. Can we get a copy of that presentation too at some point? Is that possible to get a copy of your presentation?
I have no issue with the slides being distributed.
Maybe we could put it on our website. Would you be okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
I did have a question, though, too. And I know you're sort of looking at sort of, I guess I'm wondering if you could extrapolate a little bit on sort of the longer term, maybe, and maybe this is decades out, but we're seeing more, you know, more use of electric and other alternatives to, you know, regular jet engine fuels. Is that something from your office that you contemplate, you look at sort of where that might play a role 10, 20, 30 years down the road?
Yes, absolutely. We actually work incredibly closely with NASA in our efforts and their efforts. And we actually do look out in technology out from the perspective of what could be achieved for reducing fuel, how energy could evolve, you know, looking out several decades. And we're, as I noted, doing a fair amount of work right now on different types of fuels that could be used. As far as electrification, that will happen soon in terms of, you know, general aviation or in terms of urban air mobility. I personally have not seen anything that indicates that we'll be traveling over an ocean at any point with batteries. We'll still be using conventional jet fuel or jet fuel from other sources. It'll be hydrocarbons that'll be moving the aircraft for quite a while, but those hydrocarbons can come from a lot of different sources.
Thank you.
I think, Carol, did you have your hand up? Did you want to make a comment?
Yes, my question is not as important as the others, but I was wondering when you were saying that you had a study to reduce power during takeoff, that sounded really scary. You said it was a negligible effect on the noise, but pilots are taught to use full power when you take off because you have to overcome inertia to get into the air. So I think using a lot of power is a good idea on takeoff.
Well, so thank you for that. So the work that MIT did, again, we let them have pretty broad reign of looking at different ideas. And one of them that they came up with was actually flying slower on takeoff. And we talked to a lot of different stakeholders about this. You know, people in communities heard about it, they were very excited. The pilots associations, when they heard about it, they were not so excited. But before we go forward with anything, we wanted to really do our due diligence on it. And I'm personally quoted in the Wall Street Journal saying this is a great idea, and then subsequently we've done the work and realized that there's probably no noise benefit to it. Which is unfortunate, but that's why you do the research.
I think Supervisor Pine.
What type of work are you doing on supersonic flight and noise from potential supersonic flight?
Great question. So we have a couple of efforts ongoing here. Within the reauthorization, Section 181 directed the FAA to actually provide leadership in terms of supersonic aircraft. And we've been doing our best to do that in the international setting. On the domestic side, we're working very closely with NASA to understand the noise that could be generated by these vehicles during the landing takeoff cycle, as well as to think through what's the potential for having an acceptable boom level during cruise. Because it's obviously the Concorde type of boom level is not acceptable over land. But NASA's got their X-59 demonstrator, which should show that a low boom is possible from an actual aircraft. In their initial flight test down in Galveston using an F-18 doing maneuvers, showed that the boom level actually didn't disturb the public. But this is work that needs to be ongoing because it's obviously important because these vehicles fly over land. And at present, that's not allowed.
Okay. Thank you. Any other members of the roundtable? If not, I'll open it up. I do have some.
Actually, Elizabeth, one more.
Oh, sorry. Ann?
In your modeling of particulate matter, or can you point us to a place where we can see how the particulate matter is dispersed? The question I ask is, again, from my constituents, they've seen an increase in particulate matter building up on things outside. It could be because they've reduced trees, they've moved the runways closer to Millbrae. I'm just trying to figure out where are these flows going? Are there some coming off the back of the flight, back of the plane during takeoff? How far will that travel? And then once it's in the air, because we get overflights, we get takeoffs on 19, all of those. But I'm sure the other people here would like to know just how are particulate matter dispersed. And I know we live in a very windy environment, so I'm sure that has an impact. But are there models out there we can go and look at?
Well, so the short answer to your question is the wind has, as you would expect, an incredibly profound impact on this. And so the work that we're funding right now is with Boston University. It's Ascent Project 18. That's the language we speak in as project numbers. It's easier for me to remember that. So they're actually the ones who are going through and measuring out in the field around Boston. And have been going through and looking at this. There have been others who have also gone through and done this type of work. The challenge with going out and measuring is obviously you don't know if what you're measuring came from that aircraft or the truck that went by. And obviously that depends on where you're at and everything else. And the wind has such an important impact on that. In terms of the modeling that's involved, our AEDT model it's required to use an EPA model called AirMod. Unfortunately, AirMod does not give the right results. So we're in a process of working with University of North Carolina to develop a new model that would give better results.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Jim. I'm going to let you sit down, and we'll then call up our public speakers to make comments. I have 10 public speaker cards. There's 4 for this item and then 6 for the other ones. At 2 minutes each, that's 20 minutes. And we do have a number of agenda items yet to cover. So I'm just hoping that if well, there's 22. So if your question may have been answered from some of the questions from the roundtable members and you wish to not speak, you're very welcome to not do that, but you're quite welcome to speak also. So there's Darlene Yapley, and then Jennifer Landesman, and then Mark Scholl. And we'll do 2 minutes.
The FAA's environmental review process that could include AEDT limits the scope of the review to under the procedure, and San Francisco arrivals end their procedures miles away from the airport. So Bodega West, as an example, ends over the airport but comes all the way around the peninsula, over all the cities, past Palo Alto, and then goes back to the airport. So my question is, can we get the environmental review to address the experience of the entire aircraft all the way to the airport? It seems kind of gaming to end it before the airport, and that's where all the people are that the planes are going over. That's question number one. Question number two is GBAS is an innovative technology. I noticed innovative technologies was on slide number 1. We have great hope that these innovative approaches are going to be able to reduce noise. But we also found out that you cannot use the innovative approaches in GBAS unless the FAA allows the planes and the procedures and the stars to end much further back. So all of this great work by SFO cannot really benefit the cities unless the stars change to be further back to allow the planes to have more maneuverability to do the curves and the customization. So I guess the question would be, does the FAA support this, and why not? And at the recent Big Sur overlay, I understand this was raised at that meeting, which nobody was allowed to come except industry, and no one's allowed to report on it because it's silenced, which was 4 months ago. But the question is, why couldn't that be used on the design of a procedure that is underway right now? My third question is about noise standards, and I know this might not sound nice, but I think we really want to know, what will it take, and I mean that sincerely, is it legislation, what would it take to come up with a different noise standard or different set of noise standards that accurately reflect the noise problems that we are experiencing?
Thank you, Darlene. Jennifer? No. These are just comments. Jennifer, and then Mark Schul, and then Lucy Romoli, Foster City.
Hello? Okay.
Jennifer.
So I do agree that the FAA has been doing a lot more in terms of outreach. So I want to point, I am among those who believe it's happening, but there's a lot of homework still to be done. I think it's like Conversation 1.0 has happened, and it's great. So, but now we're getting into the weeds, and a lot of the questions that have come up, people really need a lot more engagement. So in your slide 2 or 3 with vision mission, at the very end, there's something about environmental review, sort of like speeding it up in order for the program. So I see a little bit of advocacy in there in terms of, you presented as the research capabilities that you're providing, which we all need, great, but I also see a little bit of a disconnect in having advocacy of trying to, if you could, I don't know if you know what the slide is or what the term is, but it was sort of like shortcutting it a little bit, trying to short circuit sort of the environmental process. And that is actually the main way that communities can communicate with, with everyone. That's our main place for being a stakeholder. So I would like more clarification on that, because there's a timing issue. Research can go on for years and years, but we have problems happening now. And so I want to touch lastly on perspective, which is, like there's 0.3 of emissions, let's say for the whole country. I'm just saying something. Okay, what's the absolute value, and what percentage do certain communities under a flight path have? That's a more relevant number. And what is that causing? What kind of impact is that causing on people? Or the billions that are being gained from the program. I mean, for some perspective, SFO is the 7th largest airport. So if we're sustaining the impacts of the 7th largest airport,
Jennifer, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up.
In terms of perspective, in terms of concentration. So I'd look at it from that point of view.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Mark Schul, then Lucy Romoli, and then Jennifer from Sunnyvale.
Hi, yeah, I'd like to talk about the ultrafines too. Diesel produces a lot of pollution. That isn't what this is. These are ultrafines. According to the U.S. National Library of Medicine Department of Health, due to the small size, ultrafine particles are believed to exert higher toxicity than larger particles. And I happen to have a copy of the study you referred to, Project 18, which instead of doing an averaging around the country of what happens to these particles, which are primarily produced by aircraft, basically they focus on the track right under a landing arrival path at Boston Logan with multiple sites, including those near freeways. And what this study shows is that, in fact, the concentrations are more than double. And by the way, the number of arrivals they have at Boston Logan where it was tested, we have twice that over Palo Alto. So, and same study showed that the plumes are not dissipating as expected. So you can't average this stuff out. You got to test underneath the flight paths. And that's what we need, and that's what we've been asking for a long time in all across the peninsula. Test under these arrival paths, find out, are the ultrafines concentrating like showed in Boston. They have plenty of wind too. We probably have less, and we have twice the traffic, twice the concentration, and these are really, really dangerous, particularly to children, elderly, and those with asthma. Thank you.
Lucy Ramoli? Okay, thank you very much. Jennifer from Sunnyvale, and then we have one more, Louis Maraviglia, and then I'm closing it for public comments on this.
Hi. I wanted to talk about a couple of things. The supersonics was something that I have been concerned about, and the people of Sunnyvale and everyone in here, I think, has been, regarding the noise. Industry is attempting to revert back to old standards for manufacturing. I believe they're attempting to go from Class 5 to Class 3, so those would be loud regardless. So that's something that we're moving backward on potentially, so I want the FAA to be considering that when we're considering noise. The other thing that I wanted to mention is you were mentioning the sonic boom tests, and my feeling, and many of the feelings of the people in here, I believe, is that there should be no sonic booms heard over metroplexes at all. Not that there would be any effective sonic booms at ground level, so not audible at ground level. Drones are another thing that are concerning. I was talking to someone from NASA, and there are studies being done on how to bring drones into the operation. And the idea is to stack them, one on top of the other, in paths. That could be very impactful for people underneath those drones. So it's something to consider as well. Speed in flight. I had read an article that when planes are slower, they are also quieter. So I'm assuming that you folks are checking into that. But I do wonder, as far as efficiency, time to airport, if the airlines are going to kind of push against something like that if it is less noisy.
Jennifer,
so something
your
to
time is
consider.
up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Louis? From Hillsborough.
I brought up a few minutes ago the problem of our departures at night, the procedure that was abandoned and instituted in the 1980s.
Louis, can you speak closer to the phone?
Oh, and I asked that it be revisited, and I mentioned it before, but someone has to take the lead because it doesn't get done. Can it be the airport director, the Noise Abatement Center director, or the FAA? Let's decide tonight. Let's look into that. That was an excellent procedure. Who's going to take the lead?
Thank you. We will take your comments under consideration and talk about it. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Raquel, for bringing that to us. And thank you, Ivar, for putting that together. It was very informative. If we could get the slides, I think it would be very helpful to review them. We're going to go on to our next agenda item, which is a report from the Technical Working Group meeting that was held last Thursday, September 26th. And Justin is going to give us the brief on that. And in your packet, on page 33, if you want to kind of take a look at the questions that we submitted to Adam Vetter, and they did a great job trying to answer every question and sub-question that we had. There were lots there.
Yes.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you. I just want to thank the FAA and Adam. I thought he did a great job presenting and addressing our 6 questions with 10 sub-questions each. And overall, the main discussion was over the SUN procedure, which mimics SUN.
Is it Sun?
I don't know. What do-
S-U-N-N-E.
Adam?
Some people call it Sunni,
Okay.
or Sunni.
All right, Sunny. It basically mimics the current down the bay Oakland procedure of 130-degree heading. He overlaid it over various graphics, particularly the night hush and the 050 heading, just to get a better understanding of possible interactions and interference concerns, especially in regards to maybe anything that would have a, I guess, negative impact to moving forward with the night hush. And, he definitely did a good job describing some of that. It's currently in the IFP gateway, of course, and this procedure likely occurs just during the nighttime hours, and it's limited because of the arrivals going into SFO in Oakland. And from our understanding of his description, really it will mimic the same number of operations as before. And it will still be basically fanned out in kind of the same vectored fashion as before, not necessarily being utilized more because of the same constraints still exist on those arrivals. That's my summary. We also, a few other things, sorry, Elizabeth. Bert gave an update on GBAS, and we also had a follow-up discussion regarding Title 21 and noise monitoring, really just a follow-up to the last roundtable meeting where there were some remaining outstanding items, and we have that in the agenda coming up. So.
Good, yeah. All right. Any member of the roundtable body want to add anything to Justin's report about the technical working group meeting? I'll only add that it was a very lively discussion. We had a lot of residents and familiar faces who are in the audience tonight, Cam, and it was well attended, and I think that it precipitated another agenda item that we're going to talk about later.
Oh, and
Okay.
just one
Yes.
other thing. I just really appreciate Adam's ability and willingness to respond to questions on the fly. I think that's the whole purpose of what we were trying to get at in a technical working group. So thank you for that.
Members of the public appreciated that. And with Joe at your side, so thank you, guys, very much. And it was all very collegial, cooperative, and I think, we got a lot of work done. I do have a speaker card for item number 6 from, I'm just going to give members another chance. No? Okay. Seeing none, I'll open it for the speaker. Darlene, do you still have something to say about this agenda item, the technical working group meeting?
I did want to thank Adam. He did a great job, and I think we appreciated his engagement. I do want to bring up a process thing, though. The July 2019 update from the FAA said, create an OAK departure procedure that flies down the bay during nighttime hours. I do want to thank SFO, Roundtable, for following up this in a timely manner. That was excellent. But there was something that surprised me quite a bit, which is that the update on this particular item cited page numbers of the SFO Roundtable recommendations for this procedure. And this confused all of us because we did not feel that the SFO Roundtable had recommended this procedure. Adam did clarify, and it was on his slides, that it was a procedure from NorCal TRACON. So it's definitely not a recommendation from the Roundtable or the Select Committee, and to date, all the reports from the FAA has only been addressing actual recommendations from the Select Committee or the Roundtable. So what does this mean? Well, one is we have to pay close attention to what is in the reports, because it may not be your recommendations, it might be something new. Second, although it was useful to get an update on 050, It would also be nice to have some community engagement before things are posted so we don't have the reaction we did. Third, I'd like to request that the FAA to not reference the Roundtable or Select Committee recommendations and page numbers unless these groups in fact made the procedure request. Label it what it is. It's a new procedure unilaterally from NorCal TRACON. Something happened similar to Pirate. It was said that this was done because of the Select Committee report, and what was implemented was partially what was asked for by the Select Committee, but partially the FAA made a decision. Be straightforward. State that that is where things come from. Do not package it that we requested it. And please, at the end of the year, do not package it that this is an accomplishment when we didn't request it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. One of the other requests I just had very quickly, Adam, is the slides that you presented. Can you also give those to James for us? Thank you very much. Good. Appreciate that very much. Okay. We're going to move on to the next item, number 7, report from the Ground-Based Noise Ad Hoc Subcommittee of September 16th. Ricardo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, excuse me, Madam Chairperson. So we had a lively discussion. I'm sad to say that it wasn't very well attended as we've had in the past. So primarily what we discussed was the noise monitors and how they, in relation specifically to low frequency and ground-based noise. So we talked about their capability. I think Bert gave us a lot of information. And we also talked about the limitations, about the locations and what we can do so that we can, looking ahead, what we can do to measure the backblast right at where the complaints are coming from to just kind of verify it. We also, the meeting before that, we had some comments about what vegetation can do as mitigation, so we had a little more conversation about that, and we agreed to look into different types of vegetation and what species we can use to maybe add and find some locations where we can add more vegetation to mitigate the noise. We also talked about a little bit about data collection and just to begin analyzing some of the data that already exists. And so we had a discussion about what frequency, and we were kind of focusing on the lower end of that frequency range, and so we're going to begin to analyze that data. We also, to the surprise of many of us, found out that there is a low-frequency contour study that we'll now get to take a look at and analyze. And finally, we looked at next steps and kind of getting an idea of what we want to do next, and if we are going to conduct a study, and we started talking about some of the parameters we would like to look at. And I don't know if Councilmember Schneider or Justin, you would like to fill in any of the things I said, or Al. So if you guys have anything to add? I think that was pretty much it.
I would only add, if there's anybody from Millbrae watching, what we talked about before we started getting people excited about changes for ground-based noise is do the historical data. Using the existing monitors, find out what low-frequency noise we can plot out. And then based on that, reach out into our neighborhoods and find out where our residents think they're hearing, know that they are hearing certain noise so that we can then figure out where those monitors might be, where we can better sort of capture where the noise seems to be going and whether or not that will lead to a different kind of contour being drawn. So I know when I've talked to my folks, I've said, we're not there yet, let's get the historical data first. And that also is one reason why we chose, or we recommended not to move Monitor 11, it's 11, isn't it? 11. That's located at a house right next to a school, because we want to try to keep it, the monitor has to move, but try to keep it close by so that we can compare the historical data to what will happen with the new portable monitors once we figure out where to put them. So I think it was a very productive meeting, and I do recall that I heard a commitment that staff at some level is going to be actually doing the research for the tree species. Did I not hear that correctly from the ground-based noise meeting? Because if not,
Okay, we
That's
could,
what
you know
I
what?
heard.
You know what? And I think maybe we could trade some emails tomorrow and kind of clarify that action point is, I'm not clear on exactly what happened, but I think it was a very productive meeting. I think we came up with some very good ideas, and I think we have a good sense of where to move forward. Justin, you had something?
Yeah, I think I could clarify. I think it had to deal with the potential modeling that we could do and looking at different types of vegetation within the model, besides looking at building and shielding effects and reflection, reverberation, that thing. But within the model, we could utilize certain vegetation, and I think we could still look at that.
I bring that up because with luck, we're going to break ground on our project by the BART station within the next couple of months. So the plotting of where trees might go, we're in that process right now.
Great.
So, yeah. So exciting times. It'll take a couple of years, but I would like the data sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Thank you. And then it was a very good meeting, so thank you, everybody who contributed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
No, thank you.
Okay, good. Moving on, item
Yeah,
number
but I
8.
sent a follow-up.
Discussion of the roundtable's role in regarding SFO noise monitors. I'm going to take the beginning of this and then. Sorry, couldn't hear you. At the technical working group meeting, as I said, there was lively discussion and a lot.
Elizabeth's microphone.
Oh, sorry, I'm hogging the microphone.
I was just rambling on. There was a lot of discussion around the noise monitors. And I think it was a follow-on from our August meeting where Gene had given his presentation about the Title 21 requirements and the noise monitors, and then also Bert's announcement about all the new noise monitors that have been purchased and they're going to be implemented. A lot of public input, a lot of discussion about, well, what are we going to do with all these noise monitors, and why can't we decide, and who's going to decide, who's going to do what, and this and that. And it's clearly a topic that deserves our attention and focus, because we have this opportunity with the new technology of these noise monitors that, as far as I can see, can just do a lot more analyzation for us. We need to more thoroughly and accurately understand the criteria of how the monitors are going to be deployed. Right now, a lot of them are just going to be put back exactly where they are, but I know the residents feel that we need to place them someplace else. We have other portables that we can implement and deploy in some of those areas, but how can we do this? So I think that what we want to do is to create a procedure, a strategy, a way to move forward on this. And Justin had an observation about how HMMH could help us with this project. And I think that what we as a group need to, so I'll let Justin talk about that real quickly.
Okay, yeah, sure. I think, and this was discussed in the technical working group a little bit, but as part of acceptance of this new noise monitoring system, Bert and his team will have to go through a process with the vendor to relook at various thresholds and settings, not just for Title 21 sites, which we've talked about, but
And
also.
that's not what we're.
Right,
yeah.
we're not focusing on that. We're going outside of those sites.
The neighborhoods.
Yep. And so I know HMMH would be willing to review any of those settings and thresholds. Typically, the vendor initially provides their recommendations based off of looking at historic data, and they would provide those to Bert for his team to review. And HMMH and part of the roundtable would be happy to further look at those and maybe bring that information back to the roundtable.
Okay. I think that would be valuable. I think what we need is data-driven information about to validate the noise monitors in their existing positions, and to also bring together the roundtable and members of the public to have a discussion, a robust discussion about where you think you want noise monitors in your community based on the new flight paths. And I think our first step would be to have HMMH come back to us in December. This is a shared resource, these noise monitors. I mean, this is something that all of our communities that are impacted should get the benefit of. And like Ann said, in Millbrae, one monitor, number 11, has to move.
Burlingame,
because-
that's Burlingame 11.
Okay, because the property's been sold, but it's in a good spot. And so they're moving it just like across the street, practically.
Over the fence, almost.
Over
isn't
the
it?
fence?
More like over
Yeah,
the fence.
really close. So, because it's in a good spot. Now, that's good, that's fine. But in some, I know Brisbane says that they've got noise monitors that are not working for them somehow, and we need to validate that.
And there's one other reason too, and that is that within a certain distance, it could be considered relatively the same site. So you could look at historic data and compare. But if it's further away, it would be considered, and Bert, correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be considered a different site. So within a certain range in that area, you would still be able to compare the data.
Compare the data.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
okay,
sorry.
Al, yeah, go ahead.
What would be the process? Because in Hillsborough, we've had some discussions over the location of the monitor, which is right now off 280. And most of our complaints are noise-based, noise-based, which is in the lower part of Hillsborough. So I believe our unscientific recommendation would be to move it down to where there's a station, Oaks Park Station, which we think the bulk of our complaints come from. So when you say you offer to review it, what is the process for effectively effectuating that?
The review really is not location review. It's really threshold and setting review of the existing locations, because the current RFP was just a system replacement, keep the same locations. Looking at different locations is a separate thing completely.
The problem we have is the current location, we can't understand the premise for it.
Right.
Because flights do not go over it. It doesn't really capture much
Understand,
data.
and I
Not
think-
a lot of complaints come from that area.
So it is a very complicated,
Yeah.
procedure, I mean, process, because we all have these impressions, right? That if we put one up here, that's going to solve our noise, monitoring problem. And I think what we want to try to figure out is the procedure on how how the roundtable can make recommendations to the noise abatement office that represents the will of their cities, okay? And you're talking about maybe moving one from one location in your city to another location. What if the people that it's moving from get upset because you're taking my noise monitor away?
Well, if I could interject, obviously, we don't have a scientific basis for it. So the question is, do you want to spend the cost for a scientific basis? The premise or the process we're operating on is we've talked to town staff, made a preliminary recommendation. Now the thought is to get a group of citizens involved within Hillsborough and sort of float the idea and see if it makes sense on an unscientific basis. We think intuitively it does, because that's where the complaints are coming from. But once the citizens get together, and assuming we can get a consensus on it, then I think the next step would be to come back to the roundtable and say, this is where we think the monitor located in our city, our respective cities are. Do they make sense?
So there are these portable monitors, correct me?
Yes.
Bert,
Yep.
that could be used to be placed in that new location on a temporary basis to kind of test it out without physically relocating a permanent structure, because I think it's like $30,000 or something to, try to move one of those. And if we can kind of do something like that. I mean, I think that's something that we need to figure out, and I'd like to maybe Yes, Ricardo, yes.
And Bert, correct me if I'm mistaken, but so what I envision, and this comes from the ground-based noise, where we talked about this and about placing them, is that we have one process for the permanent monitors, and one of the things we talked about is we want to leave them close to where they are to create that baseline, and so we understand what we were measuring before and comparing it to going forward. So to me, that is a much more stringent process to get to move the permanent ones, which is, I think, what you're talking about, that
Yes.
1 by 280. Then we would have, what I would propose is a different process to recommend the portables based on where the noise complaints are coming from, and that would be a very different process. And so, not sure how it would work, but I just want to make sure we talk about these separately.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think we have, how many portables,
Ann.
Bert? 8?
8 new ones, yeah.
Yes, Ann, sorry.
I just wanted, that's exactly the point. We're looking at the permanents with one set of eyes, then using the portables to try to figure out if the permanents are in the right place, or if the permanents then need to be adjusted given the next gen or anything else that has changed in the Metroplex. So it's almost a multiple step process.
Terry? Yes. You're way down on the end. You got
Way
to-
down on the end, waving my arms. I think one of the problems that we have and that we want to solve with the new systems that are going in is actually recording the annoyances on the ground, no matter where they're happening in our city. And the thing that I'm hearing from our citizens is that the way that the current noise is registered, if it's not over 8 seconds long, it doesn't count.
Right.
And if it doesn't exceed a certain community threshold, it doesn't count, even though it's really happening. So the settings are really what we need to know, because a noise of 5 seconds, just like a sonic boom, perhaps, is just as upsetting as one that goes on longer. And so if they're not being recorded, that information is being disregarded in all of our noise
And
reports.
it could be 5 seconds every 90 seconds.
Right,
Right?
and
5
that
seconds,
should
90 seconds.
contribute to our community, to the airplane noise, but instead, if it's under 8 seconds, it's being put into community noise. And so that's making it look like our communities are louder when really it is from airplane noise.
And see, that gets to this other issue of the whole CNEL measurement, and the day-night measurement, which is not something that we can really control, but we've got to live with that somehow. But should we have a special, should we target a special working group just to deal with this and try to get as many of the interested members together? I think that would be better than trying to form an ad hoc committee of 2 or 3 people, because everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has their residents, that you can come armed with, your facts and figures and advocate for yourself. And then we can talk that way. Does that, I don't know. I'm opening it up for suggestions. I don't want to make all the decisions. Ann?
I would only say at the working group just last week, we talked about whether it should be an ad hoc or a working group. I'm happy for it to be a working group. I would love one of the topics to be averaging. I think part of our problem is averaging. That's your problem, on this. And I think if we can open that up, maybe I'm the only one here saying that just because it's not in the current law doesn't mean it can't be in a future law. So we have to break this stuff apart, and we can't, and know what we're talking about. We have to separate the types of noise to the duration of the noise to what's happening during the daytime, during the evening and nighttime. And it does become more complicated, but that's what I'd like to see.
But now I'm hearing 2 different things. One of the things we were talking about is placement, and then the other thing we're talking about is the measurements and how we measure them. So I don't know if that is the same working group. So I would put out there, maybe we need 2 different
Well,
groups.
is it kind of this can it be rolled in the same, Justin?
I think location and threshold and settings can be.
Yeah.
In terms of looking at metrics or averaging, I mean, the way the noise monitors could be reported, the data that could be reported, sure, I think that could be discussed by Bert. I'm looking at Bert, of course, but I think that could be part of the thing that is discussed. I don't think necessarily, going too deep into like alternative metrics in terms of, but I mean, the meter's recording all the metrics, so it's just a matter of reporting what you want to see, so.
Terry?
I believe that when we talked about departure noise specifically in past meetings, we had hoped to have a breakout group from the technical working group that looked at departure noise. And that may be a way to do with the next technical working group, is to have a breakout group that looks at the metrics or what we want to see reported out of the new system.
Okay, that's a little different than we're talking about. Okay. Why, this is all very good. And I think that what I'm hearing is that we should try to schedule another technical working group meeting to work, to get everybody's input on this, and members of your public as well. But I think a first step might be to have Justin do the HMMH, the historical data review, and then bring that back to us in December, and we will maybe try to put together a little working group meeting in November before. Oh, Mike, you wanted to say something?
I can see a value in historical data, but at least in Pacifica, the noise is no longer where it used to be. It's now at the total south end of the town, when before the flight pattern was the north end of town. So I really kind of question how the historical data would help in Pacifica.
It's not.
Yeah,
the historical.
The settings of the new.
Well, there's two things here. I don't want to confuse them. Historical data analysis would really be for the ground-based noise subcommittee. In terms of what you're talking about, looking at historics is really looking at threshold settings, which is going to occur as part of the whole process of installing the noise monitor. So I don't want that to be confused. There's two separate things here that are going to be looked at.
Okay, now, just as a kind of a question is, like with Terry, she has, I guess, like short, it hits Brisbane and it's short durations, 5 seconds, whatever. Yes. Well, in Pacifica, if you look at where the noise reporting's from, it's the valleys where we sit there and we listen as it goes by. And being we're right next to a national park, there is no community noise. This is the only noise.
Right.
Can that be monitored?
Sure. I mean, that's what the portables would be utilized for or something. I don't know if Bert wants to add anything to that, but yes, the ambient noise is lower, right? So it's a different baseline. So you have to set your thresholds at a different level.
And curious, what's happening to the old ones? Are they just being junked, or are the old monitors going to be available we have additional monitors?
That's a Bert question.
And I just want to say it is 9 o'clock, so we have to move on.
Very quickly through the chair, an answer to that question. Those items that are recyclable are being recycled. Those items that are still have value are being sold to, well, we are distributing them to the distribution program within the city and county of San Francisco that will then go ahead and lot them and sell them.
Is there any way to keep them for additional monitors?
Due to their failure rate, I don't want them.
They're very old. They're old.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for the answer.
All right. I do have, if we're finished with this discussion, we'll This will be on topic of our next agendas. We do have 2 speaker cards, Darlene and Mark. Come on, guys. And
My first question is to the FAA, Ivar, and Elizabeth, and I know this is a tough question, but who is the decision maker of where the monitors go? I mean, I know there's going to be a lot of discussion, but who is the decision maker and who pays for these monitors? We've said numerous times here that things have fundamentally changed. The noise is not where it used to be, but the monitors are where the noise used to be. So we need to kind of do a rethink and look at it systematically, which is the location should reflect the post-next gen reality and be located under flight paths for SFO arrivals or departures for aircraft procedures and vectoring. I'm talking about the allocation of monitors beyond the legal state and federal requirements. So in the spirit of transparency and community involvement, I think that the San Francisco Roundtable and the Santa Clara Santa Cruz Roundtable should be discussing this. I mean, it doesn't say, oh, gee, we're now out of this county. The flight keeps going through all our different cities. So I would like to encourage that the location of the monitors, if you are taking this bigger view, FAA and SFO, you are looking at it to reflect the actual impact of the noise that includes San Francisco, San Mateo, Santa Cruz, and Santa Clara counties. 60% of SFO arrivals fly over a border of Menlo Park and Palo Alto every day and night. So I can't see how that can't be a location. I don't know if it's in Palo Alto or Menlo Park, but that's got to be a location. I mean, we have to rise above and identify where these should go. And that's my comment.
thank you. Okay, Mark?
Yeah, so SFO, you're now in your 3rd generation of monitors. The last generation of monitors were in 1999. Here's the reports on them. If you follow the roundtable minutes from 99, basically there were attempts to look at traffic, figure out where the monitors should be. In the end, that's not really what happened. What happened was everybody's a roundtable member got one, Oprah-like, right? You get one, you get one, you get one, you get one. And so that's name one. We really need to use them for something better than that. And the second thing is you have that generation 2 is 20 years now. Look at all that data. How's it being used? Is it being used for decision making? Is it being used for anything? Or just the fact you can say, oh, I have a monitor, people, and that's it. And I would say we really need to think about it this time. How do we use the data? How do we collect the data? How do you tie the data to traffic? And by the way, and I don't mean to name check, but Juan Alonso and T.C. Rangflish are here from Stanford, and they have done that. And they have done it by calibrating $1,000 monitors that replicate what the $30,000 monitors can do. So you can put a dense mesh out, and it's tied to traffic. And so you can begin to use it for decision making and use data analytics, and not just, I have a monitor. And the other thing I would say is the one place that didn't get a monitor, and I don't know why, there's a whole bunch of data on it in '99, was Menlo Park at the Menlo Waypoint. And that was the last one to be put in, and it was canceled for financial reasons. That really needs to be put in. If for no other reason, then the monitors that they're doing at Stanford can sit next to it and keep the calibration equal so that we have in the future an ability to put monitors, one every square mile at a low cost, rather than the FAA sanctioned ones, which cost a fortune and frankly don't do that much. And just so you know, in '99 they promised C-weighting monitors. They didn't deliver. Thanks.
All right. Thank you all. Okay, we will continue this. And so item number 9 is just an open-ended, is there any other additional matters related to the ground-based noise discussion that we haven't already covered? If not, we'll go on to item number 10, the night hush procedure. You know, Ivar already gave that update in his presentation, so I'm not going to go forward with that. But, and I think everyone had an opportunity to talk about any other matters about the night hush. Are there other matters related to departures that haven't been discussed that you'd like to bring up at this time? Seeing none, we'll go on to item number 12, the Pirate 2 status. I'll let Justin give us an update. And I do have 1, 2, 3
On the
public
Pirate?
speakers on the Pirate.
Wow.
Huh?
Wow.
Yeah.
I actually do not have an update, but.
Oh, well, it's,
I
your
would
name
be,
is there.
well, yes, we'll see. Yeah.
I don't really have an update from what we
Yes.
had before. We kind of
Yep.
covered it last month.
We're just monitoring it and,
Uh-huh.
yeah, at this point.
Okay? Anybody have comments on that?
All right.
Well, I guess Mark, Darlene, and Jennifer do.
They have an update.
They might
They
have
have
an
an
update.
update.
We'll give them an update.
Realize it would be on this quick. Just a couple of things. On Pirate, I know that the letter sent to Palo Alto basically said that it vectors after ARG, which isn't really true because it's a star, and stars have 3 segments: the common route, and beyond the common route is a runway transition. And the runway transition is in the definition, which it tracks on 060. So in fact, there is a path in the star itself that goes beyond that, so that we don't believe that was accurate. And that part of it should have been presented, not the whole star, not just the common route, to the Roundtable when it requested where the track is. The second thing is, in the FOIA information, which I went through that Palo Alto got, the star was redesigned. It originally went to ARG into late 2018, and then it was on track 040 to Menlo. And then suddenly, and in conjunction with a number of meetings that occurred, I won't go into that too much, but it's a little disheartening to see, it essentially changed to something that was put together by the Roundtable as an original request, which is to kind of bring it towards the center of the bay, and it was changed from 040 to 060, which of course sent it to South Palo Alto. And what I'd like to know is, in the interest of transparency, is how did this change get made? Why was it made? Were any of the meetings, the congressional meetings and such, have anything to do with this? I mean, this stuff needs to be transparent. I mean, why historically it went 040? The initial plan was 040, and then suddenly it changed to 060, and now it basically goes from ARG right over Palo Alto. Typically, it's a VM termination, so it's a manual termination, right? And so it goes typically to El Camino or 101, and then it's close to the bay. Instead of keeping on going to the bay another, half a mile, it turns, it goes down the peninsula and cuts in through East Palo Alto. That's a typical track. So, it just doesn't look right. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
The data's all here. If you look at the Palo Alto website, you will see the different versions of Pirate 2 that occurred.
Okay.
Number one, in the FOIA documents for Pirate, there was an exchange within the FAA about whether community involvement should take place, whether community involvement is needed. And the response was, we don't think there's an issue. This is the problem. The FAA doesn't think there's an issue, and there's been big issues. We've had 6, 7 meetings between this roundtable and the SCSC roundtable. So there must be a way we can try to give feedback to the FAA that there is going to be an issue. Instead, all of it is dismissed. And I'll repost that on the SCSC website so people can see exactly what I'm referencing. Number two, kind of a smaller thing, is I believe SFO was going to check on the number of oceanic arrivals and whether they have increased after Pirate 2 was put in place in April. And I want to know if that analysis has been done, and if so, if that could be shared publicly. In process. In process. Excellent. Thank you, Bert.
Okay, thank you.
So, a lot of these questions make the general public really dizzy because they can't understand 040 to anything else, which is why the environmental process is so important. It is the one opportunity we have to document an action and to have a baseline, because the decision to act is based, or to have community involvement is based on the level of change from the last baseline to the next one. Pirate is a really sensitive topic because everybody knows that there are impacts from pirate, but it's being called a nothing and a cadex. And it's a test almost because it didn't work out, but what's going to happen with all the other procedures? And so I would like, you know, if we don't have the conversation about pirate and have a baseline and see what these routes are through a formal documented environmental process, I don't think it's going to matter what we all tell ourselves in these meetings because nobody is aware. And then somebody's going to have to dig up minutes from, you know, 20 years from now. Who's going to dig them up? We're not going to be here. So I really, and then going back to the discussion of research and activity, I want to know how to tie in the AEDT part to the environmental process because it's a mandated tool, but yet we have not seen one AEDT map for any of the procedures. So I think there's a real problem and a disconnect between what we're talking about in research and what's being implemented and the documentation. And then in the general press, it says, oh, noise is holding up NextGen. I don't think it's noise. NextGen has already been implemented in the Northern California Metroplex. So I just want to point that out, that the environmental review needs to be sorted out.
Thanks,
you.
Jennifer. Okay. All right. There's our update on pirate. Thank you all for all that information. Appreciate it. I'm going to bring it back to the roundtable for item number 13. Does anybody have any additional comments or anything about any arrivals that are just screaming at us that we didn't discuss? If not, there is one public comment card and that's Rosie Hayes from San Mateo, and she'd like to speak on an arrival issue.
Hi, I'll try and make this short. I've lived in East San Mateo for 22 years. 2 years ago, my life changed for the worse. Instead of having a nice, quiet area where I could sit out in my backyard, read, meditate, suddenly I have 750 flights landing on 28 left, 28 right, coming in right behind my house. They used to be way behind a line of trees further out. They are now right there. The problem is, I am being told by a number of people, San Francisco, airport people, et cetera, nothing's changed. They run models, they look at the computer, nothing's changed. Now, my question is, why are they able to say that when I know that something has changed? What's wrong with the information? And how on earth are we going to get any mitigation for the noise over Foster City and East San Mateo if people don't believe it's happening? Also, the FAA report has said that there was to be no offsetting of the incoming flights for 28 left and 28 right. I don't know that we've ever seen anything in writing as to why that is not feasible, to move 28 left and 28 right approaches further out over the bay, where they used to be, is my understanding. So we need something in writing explaining why offsetting approaches, 28 left and 28 right, is not feasible. One other high-level comment I've got here. It may be very nice to have our 30-minute presentation. I'm sure that's great at a high level. But as far as I'm concerned, in some ways, I'm going to make a cancer analogy. We're being told what is going to happen in 30 years, what kind of results we're going to have medically in 30 years to resolve the issue of cancer. I have cancer right now, and in some ways, I want to know what you guys are going to do right now. I don't want to know in 30 years what you're going to do about my noise. I would like to know what actions you're going to take now or in the near future. It's not good enough. I don't want to be coming to these meetings in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years having the same noise because I'm looking at moving, except I don't know where to move to, because if I move somewhere else, as far as I know, I could move somewhere that has no noise now, and then, I don't know, a year from now, it could have a ton of noise, but I'll be told, Nothing's changed. We don't know why you have noise. I'm sorry if I'm sounding irritated, but I'm really pissed off.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's see. I'm going to move on to item number 14, and it is having to do with the formal coordination with our other Bay Area roundtables, and I'm going to turn it over to Ann Wingert for that update.
Given the hour, I'm going to be very brief because there's a fair amount to report, but I think we can do it effectively, or I can do it very quickly. So please feel free to interrupt, or if you have questions, I'll hold them until the end. As you know, we started this process really on the heels of the 2017 Select Committee efforts. One of the primary recommendations that came from that group was to have a successor body to the Select Committee to address these issues at a regional basis, and to be really able to coordinate now between what at the time was 2 entities, but now is 3. Because at the time we completed the efforts in the Select Committee, there was a San Francisco Roundtable, there was the Oakland Noise Forum, but there was nothing in the Santa Clara, Santa Cruz area. That has changed, which I think is good news for all of us, and I know particularly Palo Alto has been super active in SCSC, as we call it. And one of the ideas that I think had been moved amongst all of us who participated in the Select Committee was to continue and to really see whether we couldn't begin some of the initial conceptual design discussions on how that might operate. And as you can imagine, just given the complexity of the issues that we're talking about here tonight, and all the other roundtables and forums are talking about as well, it is very complex. So we're trying to take it, I think, in what I would characterize as a very small initial bite to say, let's have what we'll call an ad hoc steering committee, which is going to be a relatively small group that'll have representatives from each of those 3 bodies to really sit down together to discuss how we might propose to all of the individual bodies moving this forward. So as an initial concept, we came up with the idea, and this was in consultation with Chair Lewis and myself from here. As you recall, we talked about this at the last meeting. And we met with the chair of the SCSC, who's Marilyn Bernald from Saratoga, who has also participated in the Select Committee. And each of us, the 2 respective roundtables, suggested that perhaps we should have a group to start of 9 members of these groups. So there'd be 3 from each, 3 from the San Francisco, this group, 3 from SCSC, and 3 from the Noise Forum. So we've been very active in discussing this idea with SCSC. Unfortunately, Oakland hasn't yet been able to organize themselves in a fashion that they've been able to respond. They're showing great enthusiasm, but particularly Chair Lewis has been working to see how they might be able to at least have these initial discussions. So the idea and the thinking is that we've already identified, and Mark Adiego has graciously agreed to be our 3rd member from this body, so it would be Chair Lewis, myself, and Mark. All of us participated in the Select Committee back in 2017. And as well, we would meet with 3 of the members from the SCSC, and Marilyn Bernald will be obviously part of that from there. And Lydia Koo, who's here this evening from Palo Alto, would be a very key representative. Just we've noticed that Palo Alto has been in a few of these meetings. So that I think is going to be very critical as well. And then Ed Bodorf, who is from Capitola, would be the Santa Cruz representative on that group. So those are the 6 that have all agreed to try and tackle this, I'll call it Sisyphean task at some level, in an initial, very initial stage. And once we are able to identify the folks over in Oakland and the Noise Forum in Oakland, what we would like to try and do, if we can do it, is to have a meeting before the end of the year. And it would be a very organizationally oriented discussion of how it might work, how we would be able to facilitate it, what would be the composition, the meeting locations, and just really not an issues-based discussion, but all about how we might organize it. And so that is the goal at this point. And so we are hoping that that will actually move forward. And again, the key piece here is going to be to get Oakland to join us in these discussions, and then hopefully we'll have a lot more to report. Clearly, the idea would be this would just be a group that is put together on an ad hoc basis, temporary basis. This is not a group that would be proceeding forward per se, but that the idea is that we would be one that would at least help facilitate the discussions amongst the various bodies to be able to see whether the concept would work for all three of these groups. Because I think that there's an overriding mission statement that we would develop, but it really has to do with bringing to bear a unified voice relative to dealing with the FAA. We recognize there will always be regional and local differences in terms of how we're going to manage all these major issues going forward, but a perfect case in point is noise monitors tonight. I mean, I'm thinking about that. I think that's, in my mind, another item to be added to the to-do list for this group potentially. So again, that's the initial report from this group, and I'm open to any other questions.
We're going to, any member of the roundtable have a comment about that?
Other than thank you for
Yes.
pushing that forward. I mean,
Yeah.
And ultimately, these routes cross, cross the airspace and affect different, multiple regions.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, use your mic. But yeah, Supervisor Pine was just saying that, he's in support of this. And actually, he's was the vice chair of the select committee. And, the ending result from that was to have some kind of a regional follow-on committee like this. So we're organizationally wise. Yes, Adam.
Just one quick. And just, I guess I'm just curious your thoughts on if you think Oakland is going to come forward and get this done before the end of the year to join, or will you go through with just the two of you?
It's a
If
very
need
good
be by the end of the year.
That's a very good question. I think what we're initially thinking is that we'll continue to try and reach out to them in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and if we're not successful, we may just start some of these preliminary discussions without them.
Well, as you can see, there's a lot of public from the South Bay that feels that they have not been included in some of these discussions, and so that would be a way to do that on an informal basis. Okay. I do have one speaker card, Jennifer, on this, and you have 2 minutes, and then we have to go to bed.
Hi, I want to mention 3 items: meetings, research, and criteria. So my neighbors always say more meetings about the SCSC, and now more coordination and more meetings. What are meetings accomplishing? Research. We have research. What is research accomplishing? And I really like the comment about what can we do now. And criteria. I'm hearing a lot from the FAA that they're saying to the roundtables, you tell us and speak with one voice, and then we'll work together. Great, but we're caught between, we've talked about metrics and everything. We're in a situation where we don't have criteria at the national level that can help us. And now passing it along to our wonderful elected representatives is again to a criteria that is non-existent. The criteria to not move noise or to move noise is not criteria. So we don't have objective. And so about the coordination between SCNC, SFO roundtable, I think we need to have like a case study put into practice. I mean, for Palo Alto, we basically have 4 arrival routes that are bothering us from the south, from the west, the Bodega, and then we have the San Jose. Well, let's pick one. Pirate is one from the west. Let's have some ADT maps. Let's talk about noise. Let's pretend, because we're not prohibited from having metrics for our own discussions to inform ourselves and to be able to speak with one voice. So we really need to have the consultants help lead on this, but we really just can't have meetings about coordination, research about more research, and a total vacuum in criteria, because that is driving us as crazy as the noise is. And I think we just need to make more effective use of everybody's time. And also, if we need resources, let the public know, you need to add more resources, more people, however it is. We want to support that, but we really can't just have meetings. So I strongly urge, and I hope that the FAA can help us have a really test case scenario with Pirate, for example, or any of the routes. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. Okay, so now we are at other matters, which include aviation noise news and updates. Justin?
Do we have time this time? No.
No, after 9:30, I mean, unless it's really riveting or,
It's always riveting, but
groundbreaking, sky-breaking. What do you think?
We're okay. I'm okay. It's fine.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
yes.
And then member
It's in the packet.
communication.
It will be in the
Save it for next time, okay?
Okay.
All right. Member communication, anything that anybody wants to share with us? If not, I'll call for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Mike. And Ricardo. Sorry, Justin. Is it-